You betrayed me and will pay with your life! I will end you today!
Please, have mercy. Don't shoot. Let him go.
The fluorescent lights of the abandoned warehouse hummed with a clinical, predatory coldness, casting long, distorted shadows over Han Jun-suk's tailored dark gray suit. He stood with the absolute stillness of a monument, his polished shoes clicking with terrifying precision against the oil-stained concrete. Beside him, his bodyguards were mere statues in the gloom, their black suits merging into the darkness, their eyes fixed forward with the disciplined apathy of men who had seen too many ends. Jun-suk adjusted his gold wristwatch, the heavy metal cold against his skin, a constant reminder of the wealth, power, and crushing tradition that acted as a gilded chain he had spent decades forging. He was a man of iron discipline, the apex predator of a world that viewed emotion as a terminal infection. To his subordinates, he was a god of order. To his enemies, he was the final silence. The price of betrayal is a currency everyone understands, Sung Kyu, Jun-suk said, his voice as smooth and lethal as the slide of the handgun he now leveled. Before him, Choi Sung-kyu was a broken contrast to Jun-suk's perfection. On his knees, his breath coming in ragged, desperate hitches, Sung-kyu looked up at the muzzle of the weapon. His hands were raised in a futile, defensive posture, his casual jacket stained with the dust of the warehouse floor. To anyone else, this was an execution. To Jun-suk, it was a necessary clerical error being corrected, a business transaction that required a blood-inked signature. Jun-suk's finger rested on the trigger without a hint of a tremor. He had long ago traded his soul for the syndicate's crown, believing that his last tie to the world of the living, his sister, had perished in a house fire 10 years ago. That fire had burned away his capacity for mercy, leaving behind a man who operated with the mechanical efficiency of a clock. He scanned the perimeter one last time, the automatic vigilance of a man who had made too many enemies. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and old grease. He took a slow, deliberate breath, his gaze locking on his Sung-kyu's wide, terrified eyes. He began to squeeze, the internal mechanics of the gun clicking into place, the hammer moving back to deliver the finality Jun-suk lived by. He was ready to close the ledger forever, to return to the cold comfort of his lonely throne. But as the trigger reached its breaking point, Sung-kyu let out a scream that wasn't a plea for his own life, but a verbal grenade that ripped through the silence of the warehouse and shattered Jun-suk's world. "Your sister didn't die in that fire," Sung-kyu shrieked, the words echoing off the corrugated steel walls. "She left you a nephew." The echo of the name, his sister's name, hit Jun-suk with more force than a physical blow. The steady, professional grip he held on his weapon faltered, the cold steel suddenly feeling like a live wire in his hand. Behind him, he felt the subtle shift of his bodyguards, their silent confusion radiating through the damp air. They had never seen the boss hesitate. They had never seen his finger freeze on a trigger that had already been pulled halfway. "Liar," Jun-suk hissed, though the word lacked its usual lethal edge. His voice sounded thin, a stranger's voice. "I watched that house burn. I saw the records. There was no one left." Sung-kyu was sobbing now, a frantic, ugly sound that filled the hollow spaces of the warehouse. She knew the syndicate would never let her go. She ran before the fire even started, Jun-suk. She changed her name, lived in the shadows of the Giro district. She died of a fever 6 months ago. But the boy, your nephew, he's in an orphanage in Incheon. He has her eyes. He has your father's brow. Jun-suk's vision blurred. The clinical, disciplined world he had constructed for himself, a world of ledgers, territories, and cold vengeance, began to disintegrate. Images he had suppressed for a decade flooded back. His sister's laugh before he became the monster he was now, the way she used to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the secret promise he had failed to keep. He looked down at Sung-kyu, not as an executioner looking at a victim, but as a drowning man looking at a lifeline. The money, Jun-suk whispered, the realization clicking into place. The fund you stole from the transport accounts. You weren't leaking secrets to the rivals. I was paying for his care, Sung-kyu gasped, clutching his chest. The orphanage, it's underfunded. I was making sure he had clothes. Making sure he had a future away from people like us. Kill me if you have to, but don't let the Jung-suk family find him. They'll turn him into a weapon. Or they'll turn him into a ghost. A heavy, suffocating silence descended. Jun-suk lowered the gun, the barrel pointing toward the oil-stained floor. He could feel the eyes of his men on his back. Lieutenant Park's gaze, specifically sharp and calculating. He knew that by lowering this weapon, he was dismantling his own authority. He was breaking the code. Slowly, Jun-suk reached out and grabbed Sung-kyu by the collar, hauling him to his feet. The victim's knees buckled, but Jun-suk held him upright with a grip that was no longer murderous, but desperate. If you are lying to me, Jun-suk said, his eyes burning with a terrifying, newfound fire, I will make your death a legend of pain. But if you are telling the truth. He paused, looking toward the exit, toward the world outside the warehouse. If you are telling the truth, then my life ended 10 minutes ago, and a new war has just begun. The heavy steel door of the warehouse's inner office groaned as it swung shut, cutting off the prying eyes of the bodyguards and the suffocating pressure of the syndicate's expectations. Inside, the air was stale, smelling of paper and cold tea. Jun-suk shoved Sung-kyu into a wooden chair and stood over him, the tailored lines of his suit appearing sharp and predatory under the single, swaying bulb. The silence was thick, broken only by Sung-kyu's ragged breathing and the distant, muffled sounds of the docks outside. Talk, Jun-suk commanded, his voice low, vibrating with a dangerous mix of hope and fury. Every detail. If you leave out so much as a comma, I will finish what I started out there. Sung-kyu wiped a mixture of blood and tears from his lip with the back of his hand. She was terrified of you, Jun-suk, not because of what you do to her, but because of what the family was doing to you. She saw the way your grandfather was carving out your heart to make room for his empire. When the rumors started that your rivals were targeting the weak links in the Jung-suk bloodline, she didn't wait for you to protect her. She knew you couldn't. Jun-suk flinched as if struck. He remembered the night of the fire, the frantic calls, the black smoke rising over the estate, the charred remains the investigators told him were hers. He had spent 10 years carrying that ash in his soul. She faked it, Sung-kyu continued, his voice gaining a desperate strength. She used the chaos of a kitchen fire to vanish. She lived in a tiny room above a laundromat in Guro, working double shifts under a fake ID. She called herself Mi-young. She was happy, Jun-suk, poor, tired, and hiding in plain sight, but she was free. He reached into the hidden lining of his casual jacket and pulled out a weathered, folded photograph. With trembling fingers, he laid it on the scarred desk. Jun-suk's hand shook as he picked it up. It was a candid shot, blurry and poorly lit, but the woman in it was unmistakable. She was laughing, holding a small boy with dark, curious eyes and a defiant tilt to his chin, a tilt Jun-suk saw in the mirror every morning. The boy is Min-ho, Sung-kyu whispered. He's 5 now. She died in November. Pneumonia. She refused to go to a big hospital because she was afraid of the digital records. She died protecting that boy's anonymity. Jun-suk traced the face of the boy in the photo. A nephew. A legacy that wasn't built on blood-stained ledgers or territorial wars. For the first time in a decade, the Mafia Boss felt the cold, suffocating weight of his gray suit become unbearable. He realized then that the money Sung-kyu had diverted wasn't a theft. It was a tithe to a life Jun-suk had been too blind to see. The orphanage, Jun-suk said, his voice cracking. Give me the address. And Sunkyu? If anyone at all, finds out we had this conversation before I get there, you won't be the only one who dies. The drive to Incheon was a blur of gray highway and rain-slicked asphalt. The silence inside the sedan so heavy it felt as though the air itself had turned to lead. Jun-suk sat in the back, the weathered photograph clutched in his hand, his knuckles white against the grain of the paper. Outside the tinted windows, the world of the syndicate, the territories, the debts, the cold calculations of power, seemed to recede into a distant, inconsequential fog. He wasn't a boss right now. He was a man chasing a ghost. When the car finally pulled up to the St. Jude's home for children, the sight of the crumbling brick facade and the rusted playground equipment sent a fresh wave of guilt through his chest. This was where the Jung-suk bloodline had been reduced to living, while he sat in a penthouse of glass and steel. He stepped out of the car, his expensive leather shoes crunching on the gravel, a stark and jarring contrast to the humble surroundings. Inside, the hallway smelled of floor wax and cheap laundry detergent. The sound of children's voices echoed off the tiled walls, a chaotic, high-pitched energy that Jun-suk found himself entirely unprepared for. A young nun led him toward the back of the building, her footsteps soft compared to the rhythmic, authoritative click of his own. "Min-ho is in the art room," she said quietly, sensing the terrifying intensity radiating from the man in the dark suit. "He's a quiet boy. He spends most of his time drawing." They reached a doorway, and Jun-suk stopped. His breath hitched. There, sitting at a small wooden table covered in crayon marks, was a boy who looked as if he had been carved from Jun-suk's own memories. Min-ho was focused, his tongue poking out slightly from the corner of his mouth as he colored a picture of a sea. He had the same sharp, defined facial features as the man standing in the doorway, the same high cheekbones and the dark, deep-set eyes that seemed to hold a world of secrets. As if sensing the weight of a gaze, the boy looked up. For a heartbeat, the world stopped spinning. Jun-suk saw his sister's kindness in the curve of the boy's smile, but he saw himself in the guarded, observant way the child watched him. There was no fear in the boy's eyes, only a quiet, piercing curiosity. Min-ho put down his crayon and tilted his head exactly the way Jun-suk's father used to do when he was deep in thought. Jun-suk felt a crack form in the icy armor he had worn for a decade. The Mafia Boss, who could execute a man without blinking, was gone, replaced by a man who suddenly realized he would burn the entire world to the ground just to see this child safe. He didn't move, afraid that even a single step might shatter the moment and prove it was all a dream. In that narrow, dimly lit hallway, Jun-suk finally understood that he hadn't just found a nephew. He had found his own soul, hidden in the eyes of a child who didn't yet know his name. The high-end toy boutique in Gangnam was a world of pastel colors and soft music, a jarring sanctuary that felt more alien to Jun-suk than any smoke-filled gambling den or back-alley negotiation. He stood in the center of the aisle, his dark, perfectly tailored suit making him look like a shadow that had accidentally bled into a daydream. Outside, his armored sedan idled with two armed men who believed their boss was inside conducting a high-level private meeting. In reality, the most dangerous man in Seoul was staring intensely at a shelf of wooden trains. He moved with a stiff, guarded grace, his eyes scanning the price tags not for the cost, but for the age recommendations. 5 years old. Min-ho was 5. Jun-suk reached out, his hand, the same hand that had held a steady weapon only days prior, trembling slightly as he touched a plush bear. The fabric was unnervingly soft. He quickly withdrew his fingers, looking around to ensure no one was watching. He felt exposed, stripped of the armor that his reputation usually provided. A young shop assistant approached, her smile bright and unsuspecting. "Searching for a gift for his son, sir?" Jun-suk stiffened, his jaw tightening. "A nephew," he corrected, the words still tasting like a miracle and a secret on his tongue. He likes drawing and the sea. As the assistant led him toward the art supplies, Jun-suk found himself mesmerized by a professional-grade sketching kit. He imagined Min-ho's small hands gripping these pencils instead of the stubs he'd seen at the orphanage. He picked up a set of high-quality watercolors, feeling a strange, blooming warmth in his chest that countered the cold iron of a life he left waiting at the door. For a moment, the syndicate didn't exist. There were no territories to defend, no debts to collect, no grandfather demanding blood-stained loyalty. There was only a boy who needed to know he was seen. He selected the finest easel in the store, a set of vibrant acrylics, and a sturdy wooden crane set. Something to build, something to create. As he stood at the counter, the clerk began to wrap the items in bright, silver paper. Jun-suk watched her hands move, realizing with a sudden, sharp pang that he was buying his way into a life he didn't know how to lead. He was an infiltrator here, a wolf in the nursery. He paid in cash, refusing a receipt, and carried the oversized bags out to the car himself. As he slid into the back seat, the heavy scent of expensive leather and gun oil greeted him, a reminder of the world he still belonged to. He hid the brightly wrapped gifts in the trunk, tucked away from the sight of his men. He was still the boss, still the executioner, but as the car pulled away, he caught his reflection in the window. The coldness in his eyes hadn't vanished, but for the first time, it was being put to use as a shield for something far more precious than power. The black sedan was a tomb of silence as it cut through the neon-drenched streets of Seoul, but for Lieutenant Park, the silence had begun to ring with a discordant note. From the front passenger seat, Park caught Jun-suk's reflection in the rearview mirror. The boss was staring out the window, his jaw tight, his thumb mindlessly tracing the cuff of his sleeve where a smudge of bright silver glitter, residue from a gift wrap he thought he'd brushed away, shimmered mockingly under the streetlights. Park had served Jun-suk for a decade. He knew the man's rhythms better than his own heartbeat. Jun-suk was a clockwork machine of violence and strategy. Yet over the last 3 days, the gears had begun to slip. There were unexplained detours to Incheon, missed briefings with the waterfront unions, and a strange, haunted look in the boss's eyes that hadn't been there since the day of the failed execution in the warehouse. "The elders are asking about the choice Sun-Q matters, sir," Park said, his voice a neutral blade, testing the air. "They want confirmation that the leak has been plugged. Permanently." Jun-suk didn't blink. He didn't even turn his head. "Sun-Q is being handled. I'm extracting more information before the finality. Tell the elders to maintain their patience." It was a lie. Park felt it in the marrow of his bones. In their world, you didn't extract information for 3 days. You broke bones until the truth spilled out, and then you ended it. Park's eyes drifted to the trunk release button on the dashboard. Earlier, he noticed Jun-suk carrying heavy, oversized bags into the car himself, an unprecedented breach of protocol. The boss never carried his own weight. That was what soldiers were for. When the car finally pulled into the underground garage of the syndicate's headquarters, Jun-suk dismissed his detail with a sharp wave of his hand. Park stepped out, bowing low as the boss retreated toward the private elevator, but he didn't follow. Instead, he lingered in the shadows of a concrete pillar, watching until the elevator lights signaled Jun-suk had reached the penthouse. Moving with the silent efficiency of a ghost, Park returned to the sedan. He used a master key to pop the trunk. The interior light flickered on, revealing the vibrant, silver-wrapped packages tucked behind a spare tire. He reached out, peeling back a corner of the paper to reveal a wooden crane set and an artist's easel. Park's blood ran cold. These weren't the tools of a mafia boss. These were the anchors of a man who was looking for a way out. He took a photo of the orphanage address printed on a discarded delivery tag wedged in the corner of the trunk. As he closed the lid, his expression shifted from confusion to a cold, predatory resolve. If the boss was developing a heart, it was Park's duty to cut it out before it got them all killed. The shadow investigation had begun, and the scent led straight to Incheon. The private archives of the Young-suk estate were a labyrinth of cold marble and buried secrets, a place where the history of the syndicate was written in ledgers of blood and betrayal. Jun-suk stood before the massive mahogany desk of his grandfather, the elder, who sat silhouetted against the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city he had spent 80 years conquering. The air in the room was thin, tasting of expensive tobacco and the ancient, suffocating weight of tradition. "You've been distracted, Jun-suk," the elder said, his voice a dry rasp that sounded like dead leaves skittering over a grave. "The choice Sunkyu matter remains open. You have always been my most precise instrument. Do not tell me the blade has grown dull." Jun-suk didn't flinch. His mind was a storm of the information he had spent the last 6 hours unearthing. A hidden file, a payout to a rogue arsonist, and a digital trail that ended at his grandfather's private accounts. "The fire 10 years ago," Jun-suk said, his voice dangerously low, vibrating with a coldness that rivaled the elder's. "The investigators said it was an accident, a faulty stove, a kitchen tragedy." The elder didn't move. He simply stared out at the flickering lights of Seoul. "A tragedy is a loss that serves no purpose. Your sister's departure served a great purpose. She was soft, Jun-suk. She was the anchor dragging you down into the world of the common, the world of normal. To lead this family, you had to be unburdened. You had to be a man with nothing left to lose but his empire." The realization hit Jun-suk like a physical blow to the chest, more devastating than any weapon. "You ordered it," he whispered, the words tasting like poison. "You didn't just let her die. You tried to erase her because she made me human. I made you a king," the elder snapped, turning his chair. His eyes were milky with age, but sharp with a predatory conviction. "And if I find that any part of that humanity has survived, I will burn it out of you again. Do not think your trips to Incheon have gone unnoticed. Blood is a bond, yes, but loyalty to this family is the only thing that keeps you alive." Jun-suk looked at the man who had raised him, seeing for the first time the monster behind him enter. The gilded chain of his suit, his title, and his power felt like they were strangling him. His grandfather hadn't just protected the legacy. He had murdered Jun-suk's heart to ensure its survival. "You didn't make me a king," Jun-suk said, stepping back into the shadows of the doorway, his hand instinctively reaching for the photograph of Minho tucked inside his breast pocket. "You made me a ghost, but ghosts have a way of haunting those who created them." As he walked out, the heavy doors thudded shut behind him, the sound echoing like the closing of a coffin. The war was no longer just about saving a child. It was about destroying the man who had stolen his life. The heavy scent of incense and old paper clung to the council chamber, a room where the air always felt 10 degrees colder than the rest of the city. The 3 elders sat behind a low, lacquered table, their faces etched with the kind of cruelty that only comes from decades of unchallenged power. Han Jun-suk stood before them, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression a mask of impenetrable stone. But beneath the surface of his tailored suit, his heart was a drum of war. "Discipline is the foundation of our house," Jun-suk, the eldest member began, his voice like the grinding of stones. "A leader who hides secrets from his family is a leader who invites rot. We know of the boy. We know of the errands you have been running in Incheon." Jun-suk's jaw tightened, the muscles ticking with a suppressed violence. Beside him, Lieutenant Park stood with his head bowed, the silent architect of this betrayal. Jun-suk didn't look at him. He didn't need to. He knew the cost of being caught in a moment of humanity. "The boy is a loose thread," another elder added, leaning forward into the dim light. "A reminder of a sister who defied our laws. To allow him to live is to allow a symbol of rebellion to draw breath." If you're truly the successor we groomed you to be, you will handle this oversight tonight. We have sent a cleanup crew to the orphanage to assist you. They are waiting for your command to enter. The world seemed to contract into a single, sharp point of agony. Jun-suk realized that this wasn't just an order. It was a trap. If he refused, he would be executed on the spot as a traitor. If he complied, he would murder the only piece of light left in his gray, shadowed world. The elders weren't testing his loyalty. They were demanding he sacrifice his soul to prove he no longer had one. I understand, Jun-suk said, his voice coming from a place so deep and hollow it didn't feel like his own. He bowed low, a perfect mechanical gesture of submission. The bloodline must be pure. I will ensure the boy is no longer a concern. As he turned to leave, the elder's dry laughter followed him out into the hall. Park fell in a step behind him, but Jun-suk didn't stop. He walked with a frantic, rhythmic intensity toward the garage. He had less than 30 minutes before the syndicate shadows descended on St. Jude's. He had spent his life building this empire, learning its every secret and every weakness. Now, as he slid into the driver's seat and gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles threatened to burst, he knew exactly how he was going to burn it all down. He wasn't going to Incheon to finish an execution. He was going there to start a revolution. The air in the Incheon dockside warehouse was thick with the familiar, suffocating scent of ozone and old grease, but the geometry of the room had shifted into a nightmare. In the center of the oil-stained floor, a small, trembling figure sat on a wooden crate. Minho, clutching the wooden crane Jun-suk had gifted him as if it were a shield. Arrayed against him were the shadows of the syndicate, for men in black suits led by Lieutenant Park. Park stood with his handgun leveled, his posture a perfect, cold imitation of the man who had trained him. It was a mirror of the execution from days ago, but the victim was an innocent child, and the executioner was a man Jun-suk had once called his brother. "Step aside, boss," Park said, his voice echoing off the corrugated steel walls with a hollow, metallic ring. "The elders don't like to repeat themselves. You said it yourself. The bloodline must be pure. This is just a clerical error being corrected." Jun-suk stepped into the flickering light of the single swaying bulb, but he didn't stand with the enforcers. He stood in front of the boy. His tailored dark gray suit was rumpled, his tie discarded, but his presence was more dominant than it had ever been. He didn't look like a king. He looked like a wall. "I spent my life telling you that mercy is a weakness, Park," Jun-suk said, his voice low and vibrating with a terrifying, quiet fury. "I was wrong. Mercy is a choice, and today I choose him." Slowly, Jun-suk drew his own weapon. The click of the safety disengaging sounded like a thunderclap in the silence. The bodyguards hesitated, their eyes darting between the man they feared and the man who paid them. The power dynamic that had held the syndicate together for decades began to fracture in real time. "You're choosing a ghost over an empire?" Park hissed, his finger tightening on the trigger. "I'm choosing a life over a grave," Jun-suk countered. Minho reached out, his small hand tugging at the fabric of Jun-suk's trousers. The touch was light, but to Jun-suk, it felt like an anchor pulling him out of the dark. He didn't look back at the boy. He kept his gaze locked on Park's eyes, searching for the moment the lieutenant would commit. The clinical, disciplined executioner was gone. In his place was a man who finally understood that his gun wasn't a tool for taking life. It was the only thing left to protect it. "Lower the weapon, Park," Jun-suk commanded, his voice filling the warehouse with the weight of a true leader. "Or find out exactly why they call me the apex predator." The standoff reached its breaking point. For a heartbeat, the world stopped spinning, balanced on the edge of a single, life-altering decision. Jun-suk felt the ghost of his sister standing beside him, and for the first time in 10 years, he wasn't afraid to pull the trigger. The night air over the Incheon docks tasted of salt and impending destruction. Jun Suk moved with a frantic, calculated precision, his expensive dress shirt soaked in sweat as he hauled the last of the kerosene canisters through the warehouse. Behind him, the syndicate's armored sedan sat idling, its interior loaded with every ledger, every hard drive, and every blood-stained record of the Young Suk family's history. It was the physical manifestation of his grandfather's empire, and it was about to become a pyre. He looked over at the small transport boat bobbing in the dark water of the harbor. Minho was there, tucked safely into the cabin with Choi Sung-kyu, who had stayed true to his word despite the terror in his eyes. They were the only ones who knew the truth. To the rest of the world, to the elders and the hungry lieutenants waiting for a vacancy, Han Jun-suk was about to meet his end in a catastrophic accident fueled by a rival gang's retaliation. Go! Jun-suk signaled to Sung-kyu, his voice a low rasp. Don't stop until you reach the safe house in the countryside. I'll be behind you in the shadows. As the boat's engine hummed into the distance, Jun-suk turned back to the warehouse. He stood before the pile of syndicate documents and the trail of fuel he had laid out with the same attention to detail he once gave to his executions. He pulled a silver lighter from his pocket, an heirloom from his father, and flicked the flame to life. The tiny orange glow danced in his dark eyes, reflecting the man he used to be. For 10 years, you told me I had to be a ghost to lead, he whispered into the empty, echoing space. Now, I'm finally going to be one. He dropped the lighter. The flame didn't just catch, it roared. The trail of kerosene hissed as it raced across the concrete, climbing the walls and devouring the records of a decade of violence. The heat hit Jun-suk like a wall, singeing his hair and blackening his suit, but he didn't move until the first of the secondary explosions, the fuel tanks of the sedan, ripped through the silence of the docks. The orange glow turned the night into day, painting the sky in shades of gold and violent red. As the sirens began to wail in the distance, Jun-suk stepped back into the darkness of a side alley, shedding his soot-stained jacket and leaving it to be found among the charred remains. He watched the warehouse collapse into a skeleton of glowing steel, the great Young Suk legacy turning to ash. He was no longer a king, and he was no longer an executioner. As he vanished into the fog of the harbor, Han Jun-suk realized that for the first time in his life, he was truly invisible, and he had never felt more alive. The morning air in the quiet, seaside village of Kangwon was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and salt rather than the heavy smog of Seoul. Han Jun-suk, now known simply as Mr. Han to his neighbors, stood by a small wooden gate, his hands tucked into the pockets of a soft, knit cardigan. There was no gold wristwatch to mark the passing of seconds, no tailored armor to project a threat. Instead, he wore the relaxed posture of a man who finally had nowhere to hide and no one to fear. Beside him, Minho adjusted the straps of a bright yellow backpack, his dark eyes sparkling with a mix of nerves and excitement. The boy looked up, his face no longer guarded by the shadows of an orphanage hallway, but brightened by a year of safety and the steady presence of a man who had learned to build sandcastles instead of empires. In Minho's hand was a drawing he had finished that morning, a picture of 2 figures standing by the sea, labeled Uncle and Me. Are you ready? Jun-suk asked, his voice low and warm, stripped of the icy edge that had once paralyzed rooms. Minho nodded, reaching out to take Jun-suk's hand. The touch was firm and trusting, a bond far stronger than any oath Jun-suk had ever sworn to the syndicate. As they walked toward the small local elementary school, Jun-suk looked at the child and realized that his grandfather had been wrong. Power wasn't found in the ability to instill fear or the height of a blood-stained throne. It was found in the courage to be vulnerable, to listen to the desperate plea of an enemy, and to sacrifice everything for a single, genuine smile. He had traded a kingdom of glass and steel for a life of quiet anonymity, and as he watched Minho run toward a group of laughing children, Jun-suk felt a profound sense of peace. He had spent decades as an executioner, believing that his legacy was written in the debts he collected. Now, he understood that his true legacy was the laughter of a boy who would never know the weight of a gun or the coldness of a warehouse floor. Jun-suk stayed at the gate until the school bell rang, a guardian in a knit sweater, watching over the future he had fought to earn. He had been a ghost for a long time, but as he turned back toward their small home by the water, he realized he was finally, truly alive. The story that began with a sentence of death had ended with a promise of life, proving that no matter how deep the shadows of the past, a single act of mercy can light the way home.